I learned a lot more about how some people probably just didn't see much about him. And then lots of people we know who were interviewed say stuff like, well, he's just bluffing, he's fooling around, he's not really like that. But it's fascinating that so many people kind of could do that.
Yeah, it is.
Arnie, you're back.
I'm back. It looks
Are
like
you
I'm
in
back
control?
twice. I don't.
Are you in
Yeah,
control?
you are here.
I did start recording. Zoom logs me out periodically. I don't know why. And when I'm not
Mm,
logged in, then I'm not seen as the host and I can't record. So anyway,
but you're recording now. That's
I'm
good.
recording now.
Great.
Yes. Yeah, so I guess there was a discussion about the election.
Yeah.
We figured that out. Don't
We
worry.
figured
Yeah.
that.
I didn't mean that. That was just while you're gone, Arnie. Now we
All
can
right.
return to the agenda.
I mean, I thought that the election has some lessons for us in terms of what we do to, get people to take action on climate change. And I also saw, maybe I was looking for it, some parallels between what Dr. DeHaan was telling us yesterday about what motivates people
Yeah.
and what happened, in the election. I don't know if other people feel that way or not.
Mhm.
Well, I came up with a feeling that it was really a lot closer than people suspect. We're going to have as many or more representatives than we have in the current uh, legislature, and we are very close in the Senate, with Casey still challenging it, probably unsuccessfully, but they have a majority of what, two? And with some very skeptical purple state senators and purple state representatives out there that are subject to persuasion. And we're thinking of, in terms of nominations to the cabinet, given that the Republicans had a secret ballot to elect Thune and have Cornyn come in second, and Scott be losing the first ballot, we should urge Schumer to pass this year a rule requiring a secret ballot for all nominations under Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution. And that rule, if it's passed by a secret ballot, would have to be overturned by a secret ballot under a new session, because that's what the Robert's Rules of Order require. So, and there's hope.
Hey, good. Yeah.
So we'll see how that plays out. And
Yeah.
He may end up not having won the popular vote too. I mean, because it's still coming in and it's tight.
So this supposed mandate, is a question of, I don't know what the story is, but a lot of people stayed home.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I mean, and it depends whether it's going to be interesting to see, I think, from Democrats' perspective, whether they view this election, whether you consider it a mandate or not. I mean, it was basically the same electorate that kicked Trump out and voted Biden in 4 years ago that, decided to bring Trump back again. And, something certainly changed, I think, between, 2020 and 2024, with some significant number of people who, voted for Biden 4 years ago, either voting for Trump or not voting at all. And, my takeaway from that was really what I thought was enforcing some of the things that Dr. DeHaan spoke to us about last night, that most people are really motivated by immediate rewards, and that we're sort of evolutionarily constructed to act that way. And things like, you know, safeguarding democracy and somehow take a back seat to, you know, my grocery bills. So I don't know how other, if that,
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, that's clearly one of the, maybe the biggest factor or the major factor, at least based on everything I've read in all the interviews of folks who basically said it was the economy and the failure of inflation and the failure of Biden to do possibly other things for the working class regarding economy, like minimum wage. They, you know, the Democrats just started helping us out as working people, and in fact, things have gotten really, really bad. And remember it being better under Trump. And so they were voting, a lot of people probably voting largely on their experience of the economy with I guess with an expectation that Trump will make it better. So I guess that's the reward is the expectation that it's going to get better immediately, I guess. I'm not entirely sure if this, you know, attention to the whole kind of reward system. It does. It's interesting to think about how it makes most sense when you've got a, you know, you've got a cupcake in front of you, you know, and you have a piece of tofu next to it, and you know, like you're gonna be immediately rewarded in the sense of your dopamine and everything going up. And I guess the assumption is that by thinking about how Trump is going to help me, my dopamine is going up, and so I'm getting that kind of immediate reward, and as I'm going out and voting for him. I'm assuming I keep trying to connect this to the, you know, to the reward system that she describes, which it strikes me as was more designed to deal with relatively immediate situations, things you had to do right now. But it sounds like she clearly expands that beyond that to even sort of, I guess, thinking about something that you might get if you vote for somebody that gets your dopamine up and that's the reward. And so you kind of go for that because of that. Or is there more, like she talked about this cognitive override? We didn't get into that in a lot of that there still is a role for thinking and overriding all of these instincts. And we didn't really talk about, you know, the strength and the capacity of how one does that, who does it, and how it's accomplished. But that's kind of another theme that's worth pursuing because it's pretty important in a lot of ways. It tells you a little bit about how you're going to reach out to people and whether or not you can actually make cases for things that people may not see in their immediate interest, but appreciate that they down the road it's going to be helpful. So.
You're saying
Amy,
the drug dopamine is
okay.
properly named because it it affected those people who stayed home and didn't vote to be more dopey.
I don't know, not the people who didn't vote, I don't think, but yes, I do see her. I see her point. The people, I'm saying the people who voted for Trump got a big rush when they put that does make dopey from our perspective. Now, be careful about that because we know these people actually had genuine concerns and interests, and they're not stupid, even if they don't all have postgraduate degrees. They're smart in a lot of ways. So, but yes, I see your point.
Amy. Mhm.
So I think it's not just the immediate kind of physical reward that she's talking about, but I think there's social affiliation too. I mean, there's whole communities of people that are Republican and watch Fox News and kind of listen to each other and just
Yeah.
are on a getting different information than we are and believing it and relying on each other for what choices to make. And that's a reward too, being part of your group.
Right.
Yeah. But
Yeah. No,
I have a problem with sort of is that a chicken and egg type of thing? I mean, quite possibly, you know, a significant number of more people started getting their news from right-wing media over the last few years than 4 years ago, and that contributed to their deciding to, you know, to vote Republican. I I don't know how much of it is, being upset and pissed off with the current administration and whoever it was that was running for the other party they were going to vote for. I think the electorate often will just throw the bums out, and that's their prerogative, and and I think that's the magic of democracy, that we can do that.
Let's
But
hope we
yeah,
do.
I don't know, Amy, I always hear about, people being in their, isolated or associating only with, people of like perspectives. But, something sort of drove them there in the first place, I suppose.
Could have been a long.
Like we saw, I'm sure, I still get the Boston Globe, and I forget what community, but a number of communities that have traditionally been pretty dark blue, switched to, voting Republican in this past election. So, I don't, there was no, somehow, I don't know that there was some, how did that happen? Was it right-wing media? Or was there something that drove these people to search for, a perspective that was more in line with what they were experiencing?
I think your point, Irony, about the importance of being dissatisfied with the status quo really drives a lot of people. Historically, I think it's been the case where there's a large degree of dissatisfaction with the current state, that people vote for the alternative regardless of, not really regardless of what it is, but without focusing so much on what the alternative is. And I think the Republicans did a very good job of combination of propaganda and some reality about the economy being bad for many working people, and immigration being a major problem. And I think the Democrats couldn't seem to do much about either of those things. That at least got through the media exposure, and so I think that was a real failure on the Democrats' part about spending so much time talking about how bad Trump was and how he's a threat to democracy. I mean, I don't think most people, regardless of which side they ultimately voted for, needed new information on that. But that was really the theme of almost every fundraising email I got, dozens a day, that talked about Trump was a bad person and he's going to destroy democracy, rather than the day-to-day concerns of many people.
Eddie.
I heard a presentation by a guy the other day by a guy named Robert Putnam. I don't know if you know of him, but he's been advising presidents and stuff for years. He wrote a number of books. One is called Bowling Alone.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know that book, but I don't know if you can see this. If I put it up, you can't, I don't think.
I just see a fuzzy.
Yes.
Lizzie.
I took a few pictures of his slides, and basically what he says is that Trump did not create this polarized, atomized, unequal America, but he exploited it. So the real threat was posed by the 2024 election is about growing social isolation and a growing class gap. And he had some really amazing graphs and slides in there. And what they show basically is that in terms of the place where the country was good economically was like in the 60s and 70s, sort of key years for us. And, the income and wealth gap has been growing ever since. And the same can be said for social cohesiveness. We become more and more divided. And the bowling alone thing has to do with cohesiveness and the culture, and that there used to be all these little bowling leagues and stuff in all kinds of towns, and people would get together and, they knew a variety of people in their town, not just the ones who were just like them from these various social organizations. And so it made it so people were less split because they understood each other better and they knew each other better. And anyway, he has a lot. I really would recommend it. It explains to me in many ways, partly the election, but also it's like how I see things so differently from the way my sons and daughters-in-law do. It's
Is
like
that Robert?
Robert
Is that-
Putnam.
Okay, I saw that. I listened to that last night. It's an hour and a half. It was well worth the hour and a half.
I mean, this was at the Harvard Institute that I saw it, but I know he has spoken other places recently. But I really recommend it if you can get that. It's like, I see now that my experience growing up and, when I was forming my ideas about our society, so forth, the conditions were so different from when my sons were growing up and their ideas. And I think we have a lot to learn from them.
Betty, in what way would you say the things were different? I mean, are you, I know maybe I'm making this up, but I thought I've heard you say in the past that some of your children, don't share your ideology, and well, could you just expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I talk a lot in particular to my younger son about this kind of stuff, and they don't. I mean, I'm really liberal, and I believed in the social contract, and I really thought a lot of. I mean, that's why I went to law school, is because I wanted to understand more about that and that role in the cohesiveness of our country as compared to, say, European countries where I lived for quite a while. But people tend to be much more for themselves than for the society. They think more about, themselves and their families and how to get ahead for them, as opposed to thinking about the welfare of the society as a whole. So that whole, saving democracy thing, that resonates for me, resonates for you, maybe, resonates a whole lot less for my son. I mean, he did not vote for Trump, thank God. I might have had to disown him, but
we'll let him know that could be in his future.
I think he has the message.
I think I can expand on that a little bit in the sense
The
that
income gap
you know,
part, sorry, let me just go a little bit further.
go ahead.
At the early part of the 20th century and the late part of the after the World Wars, for example, that the World Wars, this is the Piketty wealth stuff that picks up. People grew together for quite a long time. The rising tide did lift all boats post-war.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then you get to the 60s and 70s, and at that point, it doesn't. Some boats more than others, and the middle class really begins to be hollowed out in terms of its economics. And there is right now a really colossal wealth and income gap in our country. And usually, according to the Piketty's earlier book on the wealth or the wealth in the 20th century, that usually leads to catastrophe, just all by itself. But what Putnam shows is that social cohesiveness, people knowing each other, having common sets of beliefs, that kind of stuff too is all separating and fracturing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Ed, you had other things to say there.
Yeah, he said the 60s were the peak of cohesiveness, but that's also the peak where we started to have the Vietnam War.
Right.
We had um, the Me Too movement start during that period of time. We had, and then you go into the 80s, and that's when Reagan passed the taxes that allowed you to reduce the peak income tax rate from 70% down to something much in the 30s or 40s. So you started to create the wealth gap at that period of time. But there are a lot of protest movements developing in the 60s, and therefore the conservatives looked at that and said, oh, we have a problem here. Let's really develop conservative principles here and take advantage of the situation until we get down to the nadir, which is the election of Trump this year. Also, he emphasized that a majority, 60% of the young people grow up with a single parent. And so they don't have two parents there. They lose the cohesiveness. And then we had COVID intervene for 3.5 years, which isolated people from one another. So people just didn't develop social skills or lost their social skills. So, but it's a long-term phenomenon, and it's really worth listening to. I do have the link to it. I'll see if I can send
Yeah.
it around.
Yeah, it's well worth it. It helped me understand because I couldn't understand how these kids that I raised, presumably with my values, ended up really seeing things quite differently.
Hmm. Hmm.
Well, you can never tell with your kids. I mean, that's been my experience, and they are who
They,
they
they
are.
always surprise you. That's true too.
And what you're saying, Betty, about social cohesiveness and the wealth gap. I don't know if this is true, but I seem to remember hearing that the wealth gap today is greater than it's been since the last time it was as great as it is now was during the Great Depression.
Mm.
Is that true? Betty, you're on mute,
Sorry. Yeah, or the end of the 19th century.
or the end of the night.
Yeah, there were several sort of big things that happened. World War I, World War II. Yeah.
But what is there anything? And the bowling alone part, I mean, I somehow, maybe very mistakenly, because I've not been part of the, quote, working class, I guess. I went to college, I went to graduate school. But my image of, quote, I shouldn't talk about this, it was politically incorrect to talk about the working class, maybe not. But I thought of them as being, as at least as socially engaged as I guess we're calling ourselves now the elites. I mean, I always, when you think about, they did you, I mean, I know I need to read that Bowling Alone, but somehow I thought of working class people as being fairly, having a community that they worked, that they engaged with. And I guess the argument is they no longer do, or maybe they did and don't anymore.
Yeah.
No, or as much. So this is not a black and white, all or nothing. Yeah, you're going to see lots of variation across the country and in a variety of places. So, but it's a phenomenon that yeah, it's important to consider. Yeah, it's looking at all the different, having read lots of editorials and explanations for what happened in the election, why it happened, and all the numbers and everything, and also it's easy to forget the bigger picture and the fundamental historical changes that kind of set the stage for this, and how and then confronting the question of how how can we address those? I mean, those dealing with those fundamentally require something probably, maybe as radical as what Trump is proposing, taking us in the other direction. But I don't know what it is. I mean, the Democrats kind of recognized for a long time that the building up the middle class was kind of that's what their focus was supposed to be, but they clearly have failed in a lot of ways. I mean, they got through Obamacare, which has helped a few people. But what I don't know what their record is otherwise, or if there really was ever a coherent vision of how we can possibly do that. I mean, I think Bernie Sanders has probably got more of a view that if put into place, if it was even feasible to put into place, would get us closer to those, a middle class that's growing and a wealth gap that's shrinking. But can we get people to go in that direction?
You wonder whether the single parent phenomenon is reflective in the rise of the popularity of social media among the people who are the younger generation. That's their way to connect, and that's a very powerful means of communication. Let's see who controls those. Majorly, and I was surprised to see there's a conservative that really want to actually break up the control of social media. That was in the paper today. I don't quite understand the forces behind that yet, but even if I ever will.
So I met with Jennifer Benson this week, who is the new head of the AARP Massachusetts. And she actually brought up the fact, which now I've confirmed it, that voters 50 and over favored Trump over Harris, 52 to 47%.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit, I mean, I don't know if we're trying to draw the demographic in terms of middle and upper class or age. I know I have two kids and they're diametrically opposed on various things as well. So I was pretty surprised to find that at least across the AARP spectrum, which is the full spectrum, well, I wasn't that surprised. 52 for Trump versus 47 for Harris. So there are a lot of us that are still voting in that direction. The other thing I'd like to just mention is in this cohesive piece, the decline of religion, reasonably structured religion, not far end religion, has been very substantial, I think, over the last 30 or 40 years. And it made me think of the concepts in capitalism. How do you measure, how do you equate value? And the things that we really value, relationships, love, health, climate, they have no monetary value as in an economic system. And the thing that used to provide a lot of basis was a religious underpinning. And so I thought I'd just drop that in on the table, see what people thought as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Putnam, I think I recall, talked some about that too, as being part of this social cohesion and sharing a culture aspect of his view. And, they're just, people aren't going to church as much. They aren't doing a whole range of things that would otherwise have brought them together, had them talking to each other, have them understanding each other, as opposed to being these sort of atomized folks that we are, that many of us are today. I think definitely that's true.
Right.
I mean, I'm not a religious person, but there was certainly a value in having this communal thing.
Well, I hate to say it, but I think social media has actually become, in some senses, the religion, because it does provide community, but in a unfortunately algorithmic way, which might take us down the wrong direction because they want eyeballs, and so they tend to push you into one direction as opposed to spreading ideas. So
Yeah.
I don't pray to Facebook, by the way.
I
And
can,
certainly not X.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, and those who have taken up religion, I mean, the growth of the fundamentalist Christian right, it's so the folks who've remained in the churches. I don't know if this is a fact, but just to hear about the mega churches and like in terms of religion and growth of religion, and that to some extent, I think it draws on people who are bowling alone and really and they get sucked into it, and why that combination kind of leads to this, fundamentalism. It clearly they become a club, and they're equally isolated amongst themselves as a crowd, and developing this, and becoming a constituency of Trump, and not potentially, I guess, not seeing his moral failures even through the Christian lens. So I guess he is a Christian, and so he says.
That reminds me of one of the things Tina talked about our instinct to obey authority.
Mhm.
In some groups, that's a much stronger value.
Right.
I think that's true. And George, in the sort of the age demographic, I mean, I think as people age, they value stability more than when they're young. And I think stability is sort of a traditional Republican value, although maybe that's been turned on its head more recently. I'm having a hard time coming to terms with why. I mean, George, that percentage of older people voting for Trump, is that a new phenomena? I mean, that we're Republican, or is that just the way it's always been?
I actually don't know.
It's because somehow I thought that older people tended to be generally more conservative and hence.
So they actually, they broke it out a little further. So the numbers I gave you were over 50. And what they found was that if you looked at 50 to 64, then 56% cast ballots for Trump. Once you got above 65, then it was tied at 49 each. So somewhere between pre-retirement and then post-retirement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There are also generational effects, and have to break it down by men and women, given that the men are dying off, and largely the folks older than that are women who are usually on the right page.
That's true. That's true.
I'll throw this link in to chat. I think the other thing that we haven't mentioned was a Black female president.
Yeah.
Maybe America's not ready for that yet, unfortunately. But
yeah, probably a factor for some as well.
Right.
I mean, there's some that my sense is it's a perfect storm, and there are dozens and dozens of factors, some of which are very dominant, and then definitely had to play a role, and it all just came together in the wrong direction and pushed Trump over the top. And Yeah, and it's this whole notion of decisive victory and landslide. I mean, this Environmental Voter Project pointed out. I mean, that Trump's margin right now it stands at 1.7%. Biden won by 4.1%, and a 1.7% margin is one of the lowest in history. Not the lowest, but you go back to Bush v. Gore, and then there were some earlier elections, I think, as well. It's not so, but it's a narrow victory. It's not it's hardly a mandate or a landslide by any means, but you know, we're hearing them claim that, not surprisingly.
I think so much of it is people just want simple answers.
Yeah.
And, you know, the Democrats could have spent more time saying, well, what we have here is a timing mismatch. That is to say, that Biden has been leading us out of the depth of the COVID recession and all of the bad things that happened, the supply chain things that affected the pricing and all sorts of things like that. But we weren't quite out of it yet. You know, we hadn't made the full evident recovery that was evident at the grocery store.
Yeah.
But they were, you know, he was doing it. And they just didn't even think about the hole that we were digging out of. They just wanted somebody to say, make it better tomorrow. And Trump said that.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. It's crazy. We'll be learning a lot more in the weeks to come, and there'll be a lot more analyses. We'll get the final. It'll be a few months before we have all the final numbers on the votes, and the number crunchers can get to those and tell us what happened.
All that said, I think it's still up to the
Ed?
states. Sorry.
Let's see, I should let you.
Ed, are you, okay.
Okay. Right.
All right. So should we switch back to what we heard from Dr. DeHame and how we might?
Yeah.
Right.
So thoughts about that?
Well, I thought it was a great presentation. It covered a lot of ground. I need to look. I got her book. I need to look at it a little bit more closely. It isn't. Clearly, there's a lot. There's some very clear things about how the brain works and evolution works, and I'm totally on board with that there's a huge factor in everything that we do that plays out as who we are as animals, the animal kingdom, and where we came from. I have no doubt about that. And she's clearly an expert on this reward system, which we know a lot more about. What's a little, it's some of the nuances that I'm really unclear about, because she talks about, I do tend to kind of go back to, like, you know, the cupcake in front of you and the difficulty of not eating it, and all of the salt and the sugar that we eat because we're programmed to eat salt and sugar and take more of it because we need to. These are just habits in the reward systems. It shoots up the dopamine. I mean, that to me that is clear. But when it comes down to, you know, I think, Ron Mariano is a politician and the leader of the House, making decisions. What he has developed, I have no doubt that within him has developed a reward system where his dopamine goes up when he does a certain thing, which, you know, he pleases the corporations and balances this and comes out looking powerful. I mean, that there's something driving him that involves his reward system, but it just seemed to be very complex about how that developed. It's not a simple matter. And my point on the question that she addressed about she said, well, you know, nobody's going to ride. Somebody says, well, you know, riding your bike is good for the climate, and are you going to ride it? Is that going to provide enough reward, knowing that you're doing something good for the climate? You're going to get out in the winter and ride your bike just for that. And I think she's right about that. On the other hand, there are people who develop in some way, shape, or form, have developed a sense of reward and accomplishment whenever they bike, and in fact would feel great at going out in the storm in the winter, and then I got to work and like my dopamine is like through the roof. But how, I mean, how do you get from, I mean, I'm just more curious how people evolve in what she said was also a very malleable system. The various kinds of rewards, people are rewarded by so many different things. But I think it is true that the average person, I mean, her main point is not feeling a reward by thinking, oh, I'm gonna do this because I'm worried about what's going to happen 100 years from now and how people are going to be too hot. That particular message in and of itself is very limited. So I buy the fundamental thing. I'm just digging beneath the surface. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff that I'd like to talk to her more about in terms of how the neurobiology kind of fits with the complexity of all these different kinds of rewards and the way people behave in more complex ways.
Yeah, it seems to me it's got to be a combination of variables. Like nothing will get me on a bike in Cambridge. I'm just,
Yes.
don't feel steady enough and it terrifies me, even though plenty of people bike. But in terms of flying, I love going canoe camping in Canada and I love the physical challenge and I love being in the wilderness. So I can feel really good that I'm not taking vacations that make me hop on a plane, but I love my alternative. If I hated that, I'd probably fly more often. So I think it's got to be a combination of factors.
Yeah.
I think it has to do with your experience and how you've defined your own rewards in addition to the ones that are hardwired in. So like, I don't know if you've ever read a book called Flow by Kyle Csikszentmihalyi. And, there are people who live and choose to live in ways that we would find just abhorrent. And they choose to be that way and they are they're in the flow of that, and that is a real reward for them. But it's because of their belief system and how they have defined that belief system. And so, I'm not explaining myself well, I think.
What's an example of how they live that we would find abhorrent?
I will give you an example of something I saw, which I had a lot of trouble dealing with. Some years back, I went to Tibet and China. And in Tibet, along the side of the road, you will find people who are just raggedy and they have these plastic things strapped to, like strips of plastic strapped onto their knees and their arms and so forth. And they take 2 or 3 steps and they go down and they prostrate themselves in the dirt and gravel and stone by the side of the road. And they get up and they do it again. They take 2 or 3 steps and they do that again. They have next to no food or water. They assume that somebody is going to help them at some point. These are people making pilgrimages to the temples, and they believe that by doing this, they will see rewards in their next life. This is their belief system, and their belief and desire for that next life and the better way, the more enlightened life you're going to have at that point is worth it. And they don't feel bad doing this. They're, Csikszentmihalyi would say that they're in the flow. You know yourself, sometimes, the flow part is like you just get engaged in something that's challenging enough and it's interesting enough to you just get into it and you don't really even think about the passage of time. You're not aware of it. You're not aware of anything else. You're just, in your thing. Like maybe when you do art, Amy, or garden or something. But that's what these people are doing. But to see it is like, it's like you have from our system, such pity for these people and what they are doing and the appalling conditions and the stress on their bodies. that, in our belief system, this is one thing. In their belief system, it is a totally different thing. So I think people out of their belief systems and their experiences create goals that are rewarding enough that they are willing to do these things.
And that strikes me as really interesting. But I also, when I guess we have become a lot less religious recently, but
It doesn't have to be religious. This is just
but
a phenomenon that I saw. You asked me what flow might be.
yeah,
To me, this is an example of flow, but it's also an example of a reward system in operation that is nearly incomprehensible to us.
but it is comprehensible, at least I think. If we go back several centuries or to the Middle Ages, I think that as I understood it, most people lived pretty miserable lives, but they felt that they had, if they lived according to the tenets of whatever religion they, were a part of, that they would be rewarded in the next life. And that was, that made their, temporal life on earth bearable. This idea that if they live their life according to the tenets of whatever religion they belong to, they would be rewarded in the next life.
Yeah, I just mean that people define reward or program reward in their brain in ways based out of their experience and their culture. We have those rewards that are like the fat, sugar, salt, that kind of thing. But we have others that are created in our brains as we build them, as we fire and rewire.
Amy, you were going to say
Yeah,
something.
just along those lines, it's like the comparison Tina made between revering cats in ancient Egypt and
Yeah.
torturing them in the Middle Ages, that it just had different meaning for people. And so they had different emotional reactions and, different behaviors. So that is really powerful.
Well, and I guess, what's curious to me, I'm just thinking one connection that it creates rewards. Things that this whole notion of social norms, which is so powerful. So you start with a group of people who are all doing one thing in a religion or something else. The reward, the immediate reward of joining them and agreeing with them and taking this on is the connection. So there is this dopamine rush, just kind of like, I'm part of the crowd now. I'm part of something bigger. And I'm just curious about other mechanisms by which the reward system it responds to things besides sugar and salt, and that's the big one that she brought up. But I'm sure that there are, as probably obviously in child development, there's probably some huge stuff that's going on there in terms of structuring new rewards evolving around the reward system that evolve over time in very complex ways. And that's the part that interests me in terms of how that might happen and how the actual neurologic reward system and the dopamine kind of function within that process. When does a dopamine surge occur? And then how does it get patterned in? And then there's kind of a memory of it. Obviously, it's like, I guess once it happens and then you remember it happened before, so it'll probably happen again. So I'm going to go back to church. So I'm going to go out and get it. That's the complexity that I'm interested in just hearing and learning more about.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the cognitive science guy who wrote a lot about, how the fibers bundle in the brain to make pathways, and then he said, what fires together wires together. So that if you have enough of these experiences and so forth, then you're building a bundle of neurons and stuff that create pathways, and experiences are wired into the brain in this way.
That's the plasticity. See, a question, I mean, I don't know, the hypothesis, is there some way you can talk about making climate, appreciating climate change, that when you do something that's positive for climate change, that now that is the rewarding thing. I mean, her message is like, don't expect it to tell people about climate change, but the other thing would be like, well, is there some way? What could we do? Do we have to make it into a religion?
Yeah, I think we do. I mean, that's what, Betty, when you mentioned these, these folks that you saw in Tibet, and I mentioned, I think almost any other religion has this idea of future rewards, particularly like the Hindu caste system, where there's these untouchables, and this hierarchy associated with that, and people are born into a particular caste, and they presumably are, I don't know if satisfied, but they live their life within that caste, and it's a pretty unbearable life during their lifetime. But I guess there's some sort of wheel of fortune or something, that after they die and they can get reincarnated, and if they do what they're supposed to do within their caste during their lifetime, they might get reborn in a higher caste. And I think, Roger, what you were alluding to, I thought, was, can somehow we message climate change as being something that you get, you may not get rewarded in your own lifetime, but.
But I listened to Amy enough talking about native species and pollinators and so forth. And as a result, I changed much of my yard over to native plants and things. And I do feel a reward when I see bunches of different kinds of bees and stuff flying around in my garden now, or butterflies or something. So, this is a change that has occurred in my brain by virtue of the experiences that I've had and the learning from somebody that I respect, on this. And so, yeah, we can do that, and it does happen. But I also think that it's really tied in with the cognitive override stuff too.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I had to change the yard first before I saw the reward. And, the decision to do that was the cognitive override part.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it would be interesting for her to explore with her more how you get at that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because she, one of the things one of her messages, there were a number of messages I was writing down, but one was, we are sort of hardwired evolutionarily to seek immediate rewards, and we evolutionarily lived in a society of scarcity, and so we're wired to just want more and more and more, and that's who we are. But that sort of doesn't explain this, something like the Hindu caste system, or it doesn't seem to, or people sort of foregoing pleasures in this lifetime to get a reward in the next. At least it doesn't seem to. Where I was going with that, and she was one of her messages seemed to be, because these things that you do in support of combating climate change or the environment don't yield any immediate reward, then we have to do some sort of substitution. So instead of marketing the F-150 Lightning as an environmentally better truck than the old F-150, you market it as a more powerful truck, F-150. And so you get your immediate rush from that we have to figure out a way to have people feel that even though they're doing something that's going to, not have a real impact until after they're dead, that we can somehow make it a more immediate, yeah, yeah.
Find a pleasure in it that doesn't have to do with the
Right,
ultimate real goal
right,
for it. Well, it's like the
right.
naming the Inflation Reduction Act. I mean, she was talking about how we're wired to, want to save money or think economically. It's an environmental bill, but they didn't call it that. But also just going back a little bit and thinking about kind of the hardwiring for, fats and sweets. It's kind of a biological wiring. But then there's the wiring for social pleasure, which seems, that's a socialization process. And, it does continue into adulthood. Identifying with you. I mean, I get enjoyment out of being in this group, and my house is less comfortable since I put in the heat pumps. And it's expensive. I'm not going to advertise that. I'm not going to talk about that except here. But it's worth it to me, and I'm, figuring out how to make it work better. But and it would be hard to do that if no one else in my life valued that. I'd kind of feel like an idiot, but I don't. So
Mhm. Mhm.
anyway, just sort of how do we change how people are being socialized so that this becomes a value?
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
I
for
mean,
sure.
first of all, start teaching about climate change in kindergarten,
Yeah, yeah,
the palatable things that kids can handle. But
yeah,
anyway,
yeah. No, I mean, in the end, in terms of her recommendations of what to do, they're really pretty much the same mainstream things. Going through her whole theoretical background and everything, you still come up with the social norms are really important, and uh, the incentives are really important. I mean, when we get down to it, making some money, well, like people gambling is like, hardwired. Those kinds of things are important. And I'm just looking at there's this one review article of the research that's been done on environmental interventions to change behavior, and there still are there. It is interesting that providing information and offering knowledge about things is actually a factor on the micro scale in multiple studies that leads to people changing their intention, and very little evidence, but some in the right direction, that it plays a big factor in people making a change in their diet or doing something. And I think she really downplays the notion of simple that there is a way in which people hearing about and learning about what's going on with climate have moved people to take positions that they wouldn't otherwise. I mean, this Environmental Voter Project and the exit polling for the most recent election, 56% of people said they really think we need to be pushing for more renewable energy, and the rest thought we needed to be pushing for more oil and and fossil fuels. But that's 56%, and that's mostly the result of information and maybe a little bit of social norming. And she doesn't give a lot of, I mean, she doesn't really address that. I don't She doesn't give a lot of credibility to the fact that actually education is maybe more powerful than you would think, based on the very most simplistic evolutionary view of where the brain is at. I mean, she acknowledges the malleability and the neuroplasticity and all of that, but I'd like to talk to her a little bit more about that and sort of how that fits into her paradigm, that there is a way of learning that leads people to at least. The question is that really part of the reward system when people learn something and say, well, now I understand rationally that is the right thing to do. And if all it takes is for me to go to the voting booth and vote for somebody who says they're going to do that, I mean, it's not a huge change in behavior, but it's the decision that you made that's now in the right direction. And is that completely out of the sphere of the reward system that you don't get a lot of dopamine making that vote? And does that suggest that the so-called cognitive override or the cognitive function plays more of a role in some of this decision making than you would think based on the basic reward system stuff?
It'd be great to talk to her about that. I mean, she's teaching, so she's assuming, the last question we got last night, the woman that was sure that if everybody would just fall in love with nature, everything would be fine. And Tina said very clearly, different people find rewards from different things. You can't assume that everyone's going to fall in love with nature. So anyway, yeah, but I love the question you're asking. How
Yeah,
does
yeah,
education change
we'll
people?
follow up with her at some point. I'm
Yeah.
sure she'd be happy to kind of just informally kind of come back and talk to the group, and we could.
Yeah, I think she would. I think she
Yeah.
would. I mean, I forwarded Amy a note that I got from her this morning where, she, really thought what she saw of Elders Climate Action was terrific and sounded like she would, be willing, maybe even happy to
Mhm.
engage with us some more.
Yeah.
We thought that would be
Yeah, she
useful.
was inviting questions and
Yes.
criticism. I mean, she really likes to engage.
Yeah,
I
no,
would
she's
love
a
that.
great teacher.
Yeah.
Betty, you're on mute.
Somebody's at the door.
Somebody's at the door and
okay.
my nephew
Okay.
all have arrived, so I'm gonna have to bug out.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would be
Maybe
very
we
much
should-
in favor of talking about some of that with her.
But I do hope that, what I was hoping that we could ultimately get to, and we were sort of heading in that direction in our last meeting a little bit, was, doing something concrete, using the principles as we understand them to try to impact behavior change, either, something to do with, diet, as Roger, you were focusing on, or, some community level initiative where we see how can we get more folks in, whatever town you happen to live in, engaged in, putting heat pumps in their home. What works? That would be my hope, that we could get to do something really concrete come out of this, and more, I really enjoy this type of discussion, but
Yeah,
be nice
yeah, yeah.
to get
Well,
Yeah.
that's the idea, at least around the diet stuff. I mean, that's the whole notion of we go through the kind of the framing and the discussion and the rationale, and then we take these principles and the various things that have been shown to be, at least theoretically and in some cases experimentally, somewhat effective in making changes, and then specifically making changes in people cutting red meat out of their diet. And then we think about all the kinds of pieces of interventions you can cobble together, and then think of something that actually would be practical for a group within our movement to develop as a program that might have some impact. Now this, again, I would see we'd be reaching out to other folks within our movement who are already contemplating this, as opposed to the next step, which would be trying to reach out to the general public and make a difference. Like I think what you're talking about, Arnie, is more along the lines of, people who haven't really totally bought into this, living in town, and you really, and that going in that direction would be interesting too. I will say in the Mass Save program and the work that we're doing with the program administrators and with the Mass Save 3-year plan, it has to do with trying to turn the home energy assessment into something that both is expanded to full decarbonization, but provides information and follow-up and financial support in the proper ways that it might have an impact on moving more people to start taking those steps, because of really partly because of the support, I think, and I could and I haven't really thought about it in terms of the various determinants of behavior that we've been thinking about. We could throw that into the mix, though, in terms of how the people that follow up with these folks who have the home energy assessment, and what kind of language that they could use and support that they could provide to kind of make a difference. Now, so that would speak a little bit to what you're talking about, Arnie, and it would just mean that the process starts with the home energy assessment, and then really builds from there in a motivational way to move people down the road to the heat pump and to the induction stove and to everything else, and developing a plan and an intention, and giving them the support and the skills and the so-called self-efficacy that I can actually do this kind of thing. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
So
one of the
when,
things, sorry, Amy, go ahead.
because that's interesting, you're starting with something that people are already interested in and taking some initiative on, which is, like, how can I save money with my home heating, or, but how do you reach people about food? Like with my biodiversity gardening stuff, garden clubs invite me to speak, sustainability groups, people that are already involved with plants. And then I teach them something new about it. And they start changing their behavior. But how would you connect in a community around diet issues? What's the opening for that?
Well,
It's one thing about climate groups where people are going to listen for that reason.
yeah. Well, I think the other part of the piece of there is literature on making changes in institutional settings, and this could also be moved into the grocery stores. And this is where the choice architecture piece really comes into play. I think both education and choice architecture, and if you surround that then with some media, that's based on, I mean, advertising principles that are known to be effective. I think you might be able to move the needle a little bit, but that would take, cooperation of stores, grocery stores, and other folks to kind of get on board. And there is like a little bit of evidence mostly in like cafeterias and other places where putting placement of foods where they're like at the medical school, there's some openness and appreciation and the cafeteria serves a larger community that they might be willing to take that on. But if it went down to Roach Brothers, I'm not sure that they would be so interested. Even Whole Foods, quite honestly, I mean, they certainly, they put out a little bit of everything everywhere. The reality is there's not a lot of red meat in their hot bar, come to think of it. So but even Whole Foods it doesn't really necessarily make prominent plant-based options, and their selection of plant-based options, I have to say, and in the Morton Williams and down in Greenwich Village next to Erica's apartment, they've got some tempeh and other kinds of products that I find, and they're Morton Williams is not really looking to be alternative anything, and then that Whole Foods doesn't have. I mean, they have a selection of a lot of stuff, and they've got some really good stuff, but it's just I wonder if they haven't made the shelf space. Let's put it to really expand that area. They've just decided, okay, and so yeah, I think that's I don't know exactly how you would do that around gardening, although you'd have to the garden stores probably is the place.
No, I do have I was trying to say I do have an opening for gardening, because anyone who's gardening is interested in plants. That gives me an entree to talk about gardening.
Yeah.
With just in a different way. I was just wondering what the opening would be for food. I mean, maybe starts with sustainability groups, with people who are, concerned about climate to begin with.
Well, that's where I'd start, because I think there's lots of folks who kind of think they might want to or could or have started down this road but don't know where to go and might want to engage. I don't know that for a fact, but then the next step, reaching beyond that, I think is a bigger challenge.
Yeah.
Sure. And Arnie, we'll have to show you this home energy assessment, and there's a whole
I'd like to.
built around that. The challenge would be if people have already had their home energy assessment and have already rejected a heat pump, how to reach out to them. I mean, there is for the low income community, you do have there is a program that involves folks going door to door to kind of start talking to them. And the question is how well do they do with that, and what theories are they putting into play to try to really engage people and open up the discussion? And you'd want to do some research.
Yeah. I'm wondering if we could think about maybe 2 or 3 concrete initiatives that, one would be perhaps, I think healthy diet and how we would. And Amy, were you sort of saying that that's hard to see how you were saying an opening for that? I mean, how you.
Yeah, I was just curious because I do feel like I have all these natural ways of connecting people
Yeah.
with gardening to support biodiversity, and it just keeps expanding as more people hear about it and then more people want to learn about it. So I was sort of wondering what the similar opening would be.
Yeah, so healthy diet gardening. And, I would like to, talk about, a physical community-based initiative. We have done, and I'm sure, in Cambridge and Natick, you've done initiatives at the community level to get people to adopt heat pumps or put solar on their roofs. And why not some of those? It's interesting, just as an aside. I mean, Hudson and Stowe, Tina lives in Hudson, I live in Stowe. We jointly did the Heat Smart initiative immediately pre-COVID, 2019. And the adoption rate of heat pumps in Stowe, sort of per capita, was 4 or 5 times that as it was in Hudson. And and I think there's just, Hudson is more of a, I don't know what you want to say, it's a more of a blue collar community. They don't have a lot of support from town government. I know that. I mean, because I know Tina's always trying to get, her select board and town administrator to get on board. And she's looking for ways to get, a sustainability director into Hudson. But I don't know how much good that would do if you're not in an environment that is already supportive of what you're trying to accomplish. Whereas in Stowe, we're just we share a common border, but we're, generally, somewhat of a higher income community. We have, fortunately, the support of town government, and I guess, folks are, more interested and open to those type of things, and so we were just, much more successful, even though we did this as a joint initiative. And what does that say?
Well, I could say many, depending on how the initiative was rolled out, and you're right, depending on the nature of the population, the age of the houses, the age of the heating systems, how many were ready to retire, the general consumption of media between the two towns, and who's hearing about climate change and who's not, and the incomes and wealth and programs, and there's so many factors. But the way to begin to sort that out, would be talking to people. So I said, go to where the action is, and put together a focus group of relatively randomly selected representative people and get them in a room and ask them the right questions, and get in a case like this, I think people are willing to be pretty straightforward and honest about why they chose or did not chose, what they know and what they don't know about heat pumps and heating, and that would give you an idea of where there might be leverage and what the barriers are, and in this case, what the differences were potentially between the two towns. But that requires work now.
That would be an interest. I could certainly come back with more specific statistics about the adoption rate, but then why that was the case.
Yeah. Well, and you could look more clearly, demographics, education, income, that data should be available. So you could do that comparison, and it could be clearly other income could be a huge part of it. And I guess the other question is, how many were you comparing single family homes that were owner occupied across the board? Or do you have if you have a whole bunch of apartment buildings in Hudson, and
You're right.
then you have an explanation right there. You know, it's like,
I'm sure that played a role as well.
yeah. So all of
But
those.
I mean, it would be interesting, maybe, just because we did apply jointly. Stowe applied the year before for the Heat Smart initiative, and we were turned down. And part of that was they said we weren't demographically enough diverse. And so the next year we said, okay, let's do this together with Hudson. And then we were accepted by Mass CEC.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah,
That's how
but-
Framingham and Natick work together like that too.
yeah,
yeah, we did Heat Smart, and yeah, and we have, you know, when we have periodically have heat pump evenings with free pizza, and you get like 60 or 70 people come out.
wow.
And
Wow.
then there's a wave of people requesting heat pump coaching. Not huge, you know, but there's clearly, you know, level of interest here, and that there may not be because of a variety of reasons.
Well, yeah.
There's an organization there's called a group called the Climate Research Hub or something that I just joined, and they're funded by a number of different foundations, and there are a bunch of social scientists who say they're potentially interested and available to kind of assist organizations in doing research, and maybe can check out and see if there would be interest in, you know, we could come up with some challenging, interesting problems if we were able to figure out how to identify individuals who would come into a focus group. They could maybe they have the capacity and the skills to do a focus group, for example. You know, it's take all that burden off of us if we can just bring the people into the room or onto Zoom, that they would do that. And so this is something to keep in mind. I'll see if I can find the link and send it around to everybody in the research team. It's you just have to, you know, you join, and then they have a Slack channel thing that I'm trying to figure out right now. But they seem to have, you know, there's a lot of foundations, and they're very much focused on social, you know, environmental justice stuff, like everybody is these days, appropriately. But that may be something that you have to address in getting them engaged potentially. So could be interesting.
So, okay,
Anyway,
so we're
time
at
to go.
2:30. So next week, do we want to, I mean, Roger, do you want to think a little bit more about what? Like,
I have a piece of stuff to present on the behavior change diet stuff, just
okay,
the reaction. It's not you know, it's just kind of wrapping it up and then leading into this possibly workshop exercise for people and how to do that, and giving you the information about the research that I've done on specifically on red meat, how to reduce it, what the literature says about that, which, like I said, there's really, turns out after all of this, well, there are dozens and dozens of studies, most of which are like, they put people in a room and they have them read a paragraph that's supposed to motivate them to, and then they measure their intention after. Do you intend to, you know, it's like, okay, leave those out. And there's the one study has a very small sample size, but it involves young men in Montreal, I think. But it was very well designed, and it did have a positive outcome of significant reduction in red meat among these young men. So anyway, yeah.
Roger, do you think that'll take?
I
the
really
whole
have to
week?
go, but
Okay, but Amy, I was going to ask you also if you wanted to, you know, go a little further with this idea of how to get more people engaged, you know, in you know, gardening and biodiversity, or was just
I've got,
or you're
oh,
all,
I was using that as an example of
okay, so that
that
not,
it's easy. I'm giving tons of talks and I'm
okay, so you're
teaching,
not,
and more
you're
and more
not,
people are
okay,
asking about it.
okay,
So,
okay,
I mean, if you have a community that would like me to give a talk, I'd be happy to. I've
Okay.
gotten,
okay.
the first time I did it was with this group, and I was really nervous, and now I'm really comfortable and having fun. So
Good.
Great. That's good to hear.
Okay,
Thank you
I
so
can
much.
just
All
put
right.
together some data about this Heat Smart initiative. I mean, I hadn't thought about it that way too much before, really, you know,
Oh,
this
that's good.
distinction
Go ahead.
between,
Take
but
care.
I can do
Bye.
that. Anyway, okay. We'll,
All right. Sounds good.
bye, guys.